The first thing we do with large organizations is we hold up the mirror to them. We identify what we determine as the empathy strengths and the empathy deficits. We've built a framework of what does an empathic organization look like.
Why should businesses invest in their employees' well-being?
Well, employees' well-being, ultimately, if employees are happy, then it makes them more productive, more loyal. And good health of people is good health for the business. So we ran an index for the Harvard Business Review, and what we found is that more empathic companies make more money. It really doesn't matter which way you cut the numbers, by growth, by productivity, or earnings. More empathic companies make more money. And part of empathy is caring about your employees and starting to understand their mental well-being and having those difficult conversations.
How do you define empathy and how does it differ from sympathy?
So empathy is about empathy is understanding your emotional impact as a company on your people, and that's your staff, but also customers. It's very different from sympathy, and this is where companies get it wrong. They confuse empathy with sympathy. Sympathy is what my niece calls it's a pity party. It's you telling me something sad and me going, oh, that's really sad. But ultimately, what sympathy does in an organization is it feeds a parent-child culture. What empathy is about you giving me a situation that's difficult, us working through it together, but ultimately you are responsible. It's what I call empathy in action. And that's what we do in companies. We'll go into huge companies of about 70,000 employees and say, right, how do we embed empathy at scale? How do we change meetings, the culture of meetings? How do we change the way you communicate, in terms of your press releases, but also the way you email each other? How do we change the way the business is run and the operations of the business? So those are the things we look at, and it's very, very different to sympathy.
As the CEO of the empathy business, how do you work with businesses to make their employees feel happier and healthier?
The first thing we do with large organizations is we hold up the mirror to them. We identify what we determine as the empathy strengths and the empathy deficits. We've built a framework of what does an empathic organization look like. We have 7 factors, and one of the key factors is the feeling of belonging. And belonging is at the heart of an empathic culture. And we measure belonging by very hard metrics. So things like the percentage of time senior people versus junior people speak in meetings. You don't want your senior people talking all the time because you create a culture of deference, which is counter to a culture of innovation and empathy. We measure the amount of time you spend on company politics because, that is about pursuing your own agenda, not the organization's agenda. So our first stage is very much to hold up the mirror using data, using analytics, and say, where are the empathy strengths and deficits? The second part is then we work with the companies to actually identify lots of small nudges. So small things that are low cost but high impact. That could be anything from around recognition. It could be changing the whole performance structure, moving away from appraisals, for example. Nobody wants to be appraised, but trying to move for a much more equity, inclusive, and empathic organization.
What are the benefits of diversity and inclusion in business?
So diversity and inclusion is all about feeling valued. So the 3 most important questions you can ask someone right now is, do you feel visible? Do you feel cared for? And do you know what your purpose is? And this is all about feeling that you belong. So at the heart of an inclusive organization, an empathic company, is this feeling of being part of something and that your ideas matter. Because ultimately, that's what we all want. So that's why it's so important, because if you feel valued, you'll share your ideas. One organization I was working with, I found a sense of fear in the organization, fear of saying the wrong thing, fear of speaking up in a meeting, fear of not impressing the most senior people in the room. And fear can cripple a company. In an inclusive company, people share their ideas. They might get it wrong. It might not go anywhere, but they feel valued. They feel that their ideas matter.
How can businesses create an inclusive workplace environment?
So inclusivity is about feeling you matter. It's about belonging. I think the first thing, the same as with empathy, it really is about measuring and holding up that mirror to your organization. Companies fall into the trap of thinking about quotas or targets. It's very easy for huge companies to say, no, we're diverse. We've got X number of women. We've got X number of BAME. You know, they very much stick with the black and white, the kind of regard, they don't get into the nuance of diversity. So what I would recommend is both. So yes, you need the targets. Yes, you need to have the ambitious targets. So women and ethnic minorities have a bigger voice in the boardroom. But we also need to look at the nuances of diversity. And that comes around having that ability to call something out in a meeting, to have those difficult conversations. So with a lot of companies we work with, we get them to start having those difficult conversations. I mean, most people are really, and I'm going to be totally stereotypical, most Brits are terrible at having difficult conversations.
Mhm.
You're nodding, but we're not good at having difficult conversations. So it's about giving people the tools. It's about the senior leaders role modeling, having difficult conversations. And ultimately, it's making people feel psychologically safe. So you can say, actually, that felt like a microaggression, or that wasn't quite, that made me feel that my idea didn't count. So those difficult conversations are key to unlocking a diverse and inclusive organization.